17 guys showed up in 2.5 days to meet a child for sex, including a rabbi who showed up for a 13-year-old boy, a guy who showed up naked, which was shocking. We had a doctor. We had a military intelligence officer.
I'm Sarah Ferris, true crime podcast producer.
And I'm Catherine Schweid, former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
And you're listening to Stop the Killing.
We have a special guest, Chris Hansen, who some of you may know. Chris and I go way, way back. If you're watching us by video, you will see that I'm wearing a Spartan Strong t-shirt because I went to Michigan State University and so did Chris.
Spartans will.
Exactly. We're tough. So first, Chris, hello. Welcome.
Hey, how are you? I haven't seen you since London.
I know. It was fun in London, but too short.
Yeah.
We were all at CrimeCon together in London. We'll be there next year, and hopefully we'll be in Denver together for CrimeCon. I know. I'm excited about it. I'm pretty excited about it.
It's an amazing thing, isn't it? I mean, you have this confluence of loyal consumers of our content, and you also have people from law enforcement and all kinds of media folks and people who've been survivors of crimes. It's really grown into this enormous body of influence. So I really enjoy it. And to go over to London and do the CrimeCon there was an extension of that. So we enjoyed it.
Will you come back to London again?
Absolutely. No, I love London. And my wife and I both get all my British treats. And it's great. London's a fun city to go nick around and just explore.
Now, Chris, I think just before we got on and hit record, I did mention to you that obviously I'm from New Zealand and I didn't grow up with Chris Hansen on my screens, which I feel like now.
Are you okay?
No, I feel like I've been robbed, to be fair, now that I've been watching. I really do. So for anyone else who has been robbed of knowing Chris Hansen like I was, can you give us a little bit of background on how you came into being on screen? And
sure. Well, it started many years ago. I was at Michigan State, as Kate had mentioned. And
go green.
Yeah, go green, go white. And I was fascinated with the business and remember hearing stories from my uncles in Chicago about the Chicago Sun-Times doing investigative stories on the Mirage Bar, where they set up undercover, opened a saloon, a tavern, and watched all the corruption take place on hidden camera. So it was in the back of my mind when I went off to college that I wanted to be and ultimately, after a quick stint at the newspaper, I went to talk my way into a job at the NBC station and con the news director into hiring a kid, and still in the senior year for $4.80 an hour. And then in 1993, I went to the network, went to NBC in New York, and really came at a great time because there's so many world events and so many different crime stories, which is sort of what I always gravitated towards, and enterprise stories and investigative stories. So, from the Oklahoma City bombing to 9/11 to, traveling around the world and exposing different things, ranging from, human trafficking and sex tourism in Cambodia to child slave labor in India, counterfeit pharmaceuticals in China, and terrorism in West Africa. And along the way, we developed the predator investigations. And I had heard of a online watchdog group called Perverted Justice. And what they would do, they would go into these chat rooms and pose as kids. And if an adult approached them back and brought up the idea of sex and made a date, they would merely post this person's picture and identity on their website. And it got a predictable amount of attention. And sometimes law enforcement would actually get involved. And of course, the FBI was doing investigations like this, as well as local law enforcement in ICAC task force, Internet Crimes Against Children, around the country. But it wasn't a well-known thing necessarily in the general public. So I pitched a story where we would wire a house with hidden cameras and then use Perverted Justice, the online watchdog group, as decoys, and let's see what happens. So I'm driving out to the house in Long Island, New York, and I honestly don't know whether or not anybody was going to show up. I don't know whether I just wasted tens of thousands of dollars of the network's money. And with that, my producer calls and says, "Where the hell are you? We've got 2 guys set to show up in 45 minutes."
What were you thinking while you were driving out there? Like,
well, I'm literally thinking that, what if nobody shows up? And what if I just, I pitched it. They said yes immediately. I had a pretty good track.
For our listeners, And for our listeners who've never seen the Predator show, you pitched what was a little bit of the concept. What were you expecting to see when you went to the
I was
house?
expecting to see guys come over to the house to meet a child for sex, and I would confront them. Law enforcement was not involved in those first two investigations. Some of the cases were made after the fact, but in this particular case, in Bethpage, Long Island case, 17 guys showed up in 2.5 days, including a New York City firefighter who was later prosecuted.
Stop it. Say that again. So
17 guys, Sarah, in 2.5 days showed up to meet a child for sex. Now I'm trying to manage.
Gosh.
We had security. My security guy was there, but it's me at some point alone in the kitchen with this guy. Now it's wired with cameras. There's no harm that could come to me. I was protected, but you're still walking out there into a situation as edgy as my career has been. I'd never walked into before. So the guy walks in. The young woman with perverted justice said, "Come on in, I'll be right there." And he comes to the counter. Now it's my turn to walk out there with the transcripts. I'm just trying to keep my heart in my chest and out of my throat. And we started the conversation. So we get about 3 guys into it, and the transcripts, it's happening so fast and so furiously that the transcripts are all mixed up on the dining room table. So for the 3rd guy, I walk out with the wrong transcript. And I say,
"Oh no." And this is so which will give you the background for the person that you're confronting.
Right, exactly. So I've got the whole transcript, but I've got the transcript, but it's for the wrong guy. So I said, "It says here that you want to do this, that, and the other thing to a 12-year-old girl named, Suzanne." "No, it's not me." "Excuse me." I walk back, get the 2nd transcript, still not right. 3rd transcript, "Yeah, that's me." "Okay, then we can continue." And it's when you see it all cut together. When I had written the book about the Predator experience, several years ago, they had cut it together in a vignette, and it was pretty entertaining to watch it because you see me trying to figure it out, and you see this guy who is trying to figure it out, and we all sort of figure it out at the same time. But what he figures out is he's in one heck of a lot of trouble, and but in those first investigations, the guys just left, and sometimes were prosecuted afterwards. In the 3rd investigation, we started to team up and collaborate with law enforcement, which I thought was essential, both from a social responsibility standpoint and for justice, but also it was unfulfilling as a television producer talent to have these guys just whistle off into the wind. They had no impact at the end of it. I mean, what you saw inside the mind of a predator, what you saw took the viewer inside the commission of a felony in no way they had ever seen before. They weren't getting arrested. So we changed that very early on.
What sort of time frame did you take to change it? It sounds like this was a runaway train for you. Like you were not expecting the volume of people and the speed of people that turned up. So
Sarah, I thought we'd do it, once or twice, right? And who's going to show up after that?
I mean,
I would see this. I got to show up.
Well, and I think in all fairness, if you think about like American television and news reporters who had done like sting operations and stuff, we'd seen news hits where news reporters had gone out and done 1 or 2 of those. And Chris was a news reporter, right? I mean, I was a print reporter. He was the TV reporter. That meant he was cuter and more famous. That's how it goes. Only in your own mind, right?
Yeah.
And exactly. But also, you go in there and you think, well, the news organization's only going to support financially so much of these sting operations for a news reporter. And yet, you pitched it for this show with this idea of, well, maybe we could extend something that we do occasionally into something that we do as a series. That's pretty gutsy.
Well, honestly, it wasn't pitched as a series. I was just trying to get it off the ground and do it. And then, first of all, it took a while to get it on television because they weren't quite sure how to promote it. They knew it was impactful. They knew it was important. It was, potentially groundbreaking. But there was some trepidation about doing it. We're taking people into this very disturbing world. Now, everybody knew it was going to air, but it had gone through multiple versions. And finally, in a fit of frustration at a meeting, I said, well, here's how we tease it. There's a man standing on your back porch about to do this to your child, and tonight we're going to show you how to prevent that from happening. And people looked at me, and my bosses said, you're right. That's it.
Yeah.
That's what happened. And so we aired it, and it got the predictable response. I mean, I was getting phone calls at home saying, "Oh my God." And so we did it again, with some refined techniques in suburban Washington, D.C. Actually, it was at the home of a friend who was a retired FBI agent, Kate, who let us use his house. And again, we didn't
That's
have
pretty
law
cool.
enforcement there. Yeah, it was very cool. And so, again, a couple dozen guys show up, including a rabbi who showed up for a 13-year-old boy, a guy who showed up naked, which was shocking. We had a doctor. We had a military intelligence officer. And to their credit, both the FBI and the Fairfax County Police Department prosecuted a number of those cases after the fact. Guys went away, and they were good, solid prosecutions. But we realized after that particular investigation that we needed to be closer to law enforcement in the course of the investigation. We had law enforcement agencies like the first one with which we worked was the Riverside County Sheriff's Office. And they were willing to do this because they knew it was important. They knew it was going on in their community, and they wanted to take bad guys off the street, and they wanted to send a message out to their community. And in fact, during that investigation in Riverside County, we caught 51 guys in 3 days. And again,
3 days. 51 guys, 3 days.
And we had a teacher.
And those are just the 51 guys that you
Turned up.
showed up.
Exactly.
That's how
And
prevalent it is.
Right. And remember, in those days, in the early days, that would have been in January 2006. But in those days, guys, there were fewer places for predators to look for kids. So, we essentially put decoys in AOL and Yahoo chat rooms, maybe MySpace, if you remember what MySpace was many years ago.
You're aging us, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. The activity was more condensed, so it was easier to find these guys. Today, there are exponentially more platforms upon which adults can approach children. So it makes the investigative work much more challenging for law enforcement and for us because the activity is more diffuse. There's more of it than ever before. And this is backed up by statistics from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and other law enforcement sources that are very reliable. It's happening. There's no question. So how do we root it out? It becomes more challenging every year. But had you asked me 20 years ago if we'd still be doing this particular franchise, I would have said probably not. Who's going to show up? Again, just like I thought after the first couple investigations. But, I did 2 different stings in the last 2 weeks. I got back yesterday morning from a sting.
Goodness.
Again, in the combination of these 2 stings, one in Michigan, one in Florida, we saw people ranging from a federal corrections officer to a university professor to a lifeguard at a Disney resort to an illegal immigrant to a guy who is out on parole.
That's shocking.
Doing the same thing in another state. This is in the last 10 days, guys.
You've done this for a long, long time now. Does anything shock you about who's turning up, or do you see any commonalities?
Yes, it shocks me. I'm always shocked.
I'm shocked.
I don't take any of this stuff for granted. I mean, what shocks me is that I'm sitting across from a 30-something-year-old guy who is a lifeguard in a Disney resort who spends his days looking at little girls in bikinis whose parents think they're having a wonderful, safe time at a Disney resort, and this predator is ogling them. And that's why we do these investigations, because now he's known. Now he will not work at a Disney resort anymore. Yeah. And I'm not pinning this on Disney. I mean, Disney does a good job doing background, but that's where these guys go to play out their fantasies in some cases.
What I noticed when I was watching the YouTube clips from back in the day is that all of them that I saw were always like, well, this is the first time. This is the first time I've ever done this, right? I've never turned up before. What's your take on that?
Well, let me ask you, Sarah, if you heard 600 times over 20 years, this is my first time, how many of them would you believe?
I mean, I was sitting on a couch with 3 16-year-old girls screaming bullshit. Yeah, no, I think bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everybody starts someplace. Everybody robs their first bank or steals their first wallet or, their first bag of heroin. But, I doubt that all of these guys, or any significant percentage of them, it's their first time. I mean, I'm sure some of them had the unlucky experience of doing this the first time and coming face to face with me. I'm sure that's happened.
For these individuals that you deal with, they're walking into a situation, that's because they've done the things, the precursors that got them to that point.
Oftentimes, I think those precursors involve the heavy viewing of pornography, not run-of-the-mill pornography that, people might look at and think is harmless, but child pornography or aberrant pornography. I think that if you talk to, and I have talked to these people, psychiatrists who go into federal prisons, who make it their business, their career to understand the minds of a predator, they will tell you that almost without exception, that there is a link between the viewage of child pornography and offending.
We saw that in the FBI. We absolutely, we have child pornography teams understanding that the FBI can only capture, so much. We look for like the worst offenders, so to speak, like the people who are manufacturing child pornography. And we see that these predators, they start looking at it and then they start visually, like a lifeguard, going there to see somebody who is in a situation, a teacher or somebody in a trusted, advisor position where they can be around children, then the touching of the children. So it's like bit by bit, it's a gradual, like it is with somebody who commits a violent act.
Turning into the rapist who ultimately, in some cases, most extreme, turns into a serial killer. I mean, that's that's the path on this. There's no question. And it's been proven in the most extreme cases, that's how this works. So you got a guy who, has these urges and is attracted to younger boys or girls. And at some point they obsess over it. I liken it to having a heroin addiction. These guys get addicted to it. The heroin addict knows there's a 20% chance there's fentanyl in the heroin, but they roll the dice, they get the heroin. The predator knows there's a 20% chance it's the FBI or a local law enforcement agency or a task force or me, and they roll the dice. And more often than ever before in recent investigations, we see guys come in who, before I can say a word, say, "Oh, you're Chris Hansen." I said, "How did you know that?" He goes, "Well, I've seen the show." You saw the show.
What?
Some have listened to the podcast, Predators I've Caught, and they show up anyway.
That's crazy.
But they have this weird thing, Sarah, where they sort of say, okay, those guys are bad, but I'm not really here to do that.
Yeah.
I was here to check on the girls. So they're able to have this split mind where those guys are horrible creeps. They're bad. Hey, they're stupid or whatever. And then they say, well, I'm different. That's not really.
Yeah. What percentage of them say, I was just worried about her because she was doing this online and I came to warn her?
40%. The professor who walked into our kitchen in Michigan 2 weeks ago had elaborate excuse about how he would go online to these particular sites where young women were being exploited for sex, and he would sometimes send them money because they were in a difficult situation. He's trying to save them. Well, what he was doing was probing and being curious about at what point is he going to have sex, talking about
that's grooming.
That's 100% grooming.
Yes, exactly. They're looking for a vulnerable population. And so he's looking for an opportunity. Now, as he walks in, before he tells me the story, you see him thinking about it in his car, getting the courage up. He walks in, the decoy meets him, says, come on in. And what does he do? He locks the door. So is a fellow who is there to help somebody, is that his first legitimate, thoughtful idea is to lock the door? Or is he worried that somebody's parents are going to walk in because the girl's only 14 or 15 years old? And you see him, and it's one of the most telling things of the video, him locking the door. But we've seen, in the last couple of months, former cops, none of this changes. We see people who are in mainstream society who are committing these crimes. And if the law enforcement agencies around the country aren't doing this, the ones who aren't are merely allowing this activity to be pushed into their jurisdictions because it's out there. And it's something that has to be continually done, whether you do it twice a year in major sweeps or you do it 6 times a year in smaller sting operations, whatever it is, you need to put the word out. And even when you do it, you're still going to continue to catch guys, but at least there's awareness, right?
Yeah.
Because I liken this to heroin addiction, earlier, but it's different in the fact that there is less opportunity for demand reduction. These guys are always going to be out there. And the law enforcement agencies can't be everywhere. So your best defense, and I'm absolutely convinced of this, is the best defense you have to protect your children is the conversation you have with them and the relationship you develop with your kids so that they know not to do this, not to invite this problem into their lives. Because as you said, Kate, these guys are groomers. They're very adept at grooming. It's almost like they have a textbook available online, the Predator's Grooming Handbook, because they follow the same road. And when I was growing up, the admonition was don't talk to strangers. Well, it was good advice then, good advice now. The problem now is the guy who's a stranger on Wednesday is not a stranger about it because he's been so adept at this grooming process.
I think the thing that really is quite shocking about when you watch your clips is what these guys look like. They don't have horns. They don't have a third eye. They can blend so seamlessly. And also what I noticed was the way that their masks slipped when you come into it. So when they walk into the situation and the setup and they meet the decoy, which by the way, the ones I watched, what incredible actresses that you've got going on and actors. They were phenomenal. They must have been absolutely bricking it as well. I mean, in that situation.
Now we use decoys on site and online who are members of law enforcement. So each agency has somebody who looks younger, can act, and do all that because, and Kate, you're aware of this, the chain of custody of evidence, it becomes a lot cleaner prosecution if the chatters and the on-site people.
And we want them to be able to go in and testify, about what, if they need to go in and testify and it makes the defendant know, look, this law enforcement officer who's considered to be very credible, and does this for a living is going to be able to come in and testify. There isn't going to be any confusion about who she was or what her intention was, the actual words used in the messaging.
It's all, and the beauty of these cases is that most of the time the crime is committed in the actual chat, in the solicitation. So once the chat occurs, the solicitation of a minor for sex, albeit called different things in different jurisdictions, is committed. And then if the person gets in a car or gets on a bus or gets in an Uber to travel, whether they make it or not, the crime's been committed.
Yeah, it's an act in furtherance. They come to the house. That's an act in furtherance of the crime.
There are people even within NBC who are like, oh my God, what are we doing this Predator thing? It's so out there. It's so controversial. It's we're working too closely with law enforcement. Well, all right. But look at what we've done over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Talking of what you've done, what do you think has been your proudest moment that you would, your legacy and go that I'm so amazed that I did that, or I'm so proud of that moment?
I've been very blessed, Sarah, to have the opportunity and the platform and the support of a large network and now my own network to do these sorts of things. So I think if I had to pick one story out of many of which I am extraordinarily proud, we went undercover into Cambodia with an NGO, a non-government organization called the International Justice Mission based in Washington. And we infiltrated a brothel outside of Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and were involved in a raid. First of all, we got in there with hidden cameras, posed as sex tourists from America, and showed what was going on, which was essentially the sale of children as young as 5 and 6 years old for sex. And many of it had been kidnapped and taken into custody. And it was just truly an eye-opening experience. But out of that, 37 young women were rescued, girls. And we were able to put together a very dramatic documentary at Dateline at the time, which won 2 Emmys, and we called it Children for Sale. And then went back about 5-6 years later and saw where some of the girls were and went to the school where they were continuing to grow and prosper and become, wonderful young ladies. And so out of many, many, many stories, breaking news and 9/11 and Oklahoma City and storms and things that I've covered over many, many years, of which I'm very proud. I think that is the one that stands out because it set the template to do the Predator investigation. It set the template to remind me and everybody on my team that this sort of enterprise reporting is important, that we need to take people into the commission of the crime and to have courage and to be brave, to not say, oh, we've never done that before, so we can't do it, or so-and-so said that's a bad idea. Well, why? You got to keep asking the question, why? And not come up with reasons not to do it, but come up with ways to do it. And you continue to push the envelope that way. And that's the way you continue to produce, content that is just fascinating to people and I think relevant and important.
So, Chris, all right, now you're a franchise. You were a franchise before. How do you identify yourself when you introduce yourself to somebody? Hi, I'm on a streaming platform. Like, how do you introduce yourself?
It's funny because, every once in a while you run into somebody who doesn't get your name or whatever, or, somebody who doesn't immediately know who you are. Somebody will ask, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm Chris Hansen. Just so
That's hashtag goals, isn't it? Like, just I'm Sarah Ferris.
take a minute to let it sink in. It's like, oh, I get it. Yeah. So it is. Look, again, everything I've done has led up to this. I was very fortunate to cross paths with a fellow named Sean Reck, who had already done a streaming network in the gospel world, probably something you've never heard of, but the most successful streaming network. And
I think Chris is saying we're not religious. I think that's what I'm
no, I didn't know what it was either. He did a great
like.
He's read the room over here.
American Gospel TV. It's great. It's still up there, very popular. But the point of it was that he had the template for his streaming. Sean Reck did, and he had produced a film called White Boy, which is about White Boy Rick, Rick Wershe, and I had broken that back in the '80s in Detroit. And so he had interviewed me for the documentary, and we stayed in contact. And he's a filmmaker based in Cleveland, and said, we're going to do this. I said, you're absolutely right. I'm all in, and so it'll be 2 years this Thanksgiving, and it's gone extraordinarily well. And it could not be busier, that's for sure. But I'm pleased with it, and I think this is for a guy who spent so many years in a traditional corporate structure. And we have a traditional corporate structure. We're beholden to people and everything else. But to have the flexibility to say, I'm doing this today, send a crew to LA, we'll have it ready, and to have so many different platforms besides True Blue, which is subscription streaming like Netflix for crime. We have fast channels. We program channels with our content on Roku, soon on Amazon, every other streaming platform you can get, every monitor you can buy has a True Blue component to it. So, when we do something, it gets seen on multiple platforms and reaches millions and millions of people. So it's a very cool opportunity for a guy who's been nicking around as many years as I have to do it. I think, look, you see, Dan Abrams has done it with Law and Crime and still has a presence on a traditional network. So it's the best hybrid that you could ever expect for somebody like me. And
for a kid who probably went into news because he didn't like his math class.
His parents didn't have high expectations initially.
Well, tell us, Chris, give us the lowdown of everything you've got going on at the moment, because I know that's quite...
So we have True Blue, which is TRUBLU. Watch trueblue.com for details. We have the podcast called Predators I've Caught, which is on every platform. We're above 200 episodes now. And that the podcast has been a great experience because, as you guys probably know from doing this podcast, you have a very close relationship with the listener. And so what I do in the podcast is I take one case, one guy, and I break down, I immerse myself in it, the tapes, the transcripts, and then everything else we've learned since then. So we have collaborated with Truth Finder so we can go back and find out about this guy. And it's a very personal recount of those events. And I liken it to therapy because I go back so deep in this, and I don't write a script. I mean, I just immerse myself into it and then talk to the audience about it. And then I take a question from the audience, and that's a very good relationship builder, I think, because I take some time and really address it. So the podcast has been great. And then, all over social media, and we're on, we just got verified on TikTok. So you'll be happy to know that.
I mean, you've made it when my daughter is seeing you're coming up on her For You page, I say.
Yeah,
if you're hitting the 16-year-old demographic.
Yeah. And they know exactly who we are because of YouTube.
Exactly. Yeah.
Chris, when we started this podcast, I think that was one of the things that we wanted to do, which we've done, is we take one case we go deep dive into it.
Yeah.
We back it up with what happened at Sandy Hook. That was the first episode we did. And to say, how did this kid end up in that situation and how could it have been prevented? And that's kind of been the focus of our podcast.
Purpose of a podcast, really, right? Is to do a deep dive and to give it some thought and to allow people to listen to your perspective in a way that, they get information they won't get anywhere else. And you guys are uniquely qualified to do that. So I think that's a great idea.
One of us.
And so you have, well, Sarah does all the workload. So I just come on in a t-shirt and talk. But there's more. So True Blue, Predators I've Caught. Can you keep track of everything you're doing, Chris? Probably not.
With Chris Hansen, which is on the platform. So everything really grows out of the True Blue streaming platform. So it's great.
The best place for people to find everything Chris Hansen.
You can go to Instagram, official Chris Hansen, @Chris Hansen on Twitter X, and then on TikTok is Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. And then, of course, if they just go to the watchtrueblue.com page, they can see everything's there. And then the podcast is on every platform, so it's hard to miss.
Hansen, if you don't know.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Sarah, thank you.
I don't know if it is a pleasure because I don't know if I feel more unsettled knowing that there's so many creeps out there.
I have that effect on people, Sarah.
Yeah, but I mean, I do feel, I always think it's empowering to know that you've taken that many people off the streets. So well done. And thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Great to see you in London. Tell everybody I said hello and we'll do this again.
Absolutely.
Count on it. Be safe.
Thank you for joining us on Stop the Killing. Remember, these conversations aren't just important, they're necessary. If you're ready to dive deeper into the issues we cover, Catherine's book, Stop the Killing, and also How to Talk About Guns with Anyone are available now at catherineschweit.com. Stop the Killing is proudly produced by Sarah Ferris Media. For more award-winning podcasts like Conning the Con and Watching Two Detectives, visit sarahferrismedia.com. As an independent podcast, we rely on your support to keep these critical discussions alive. If you value our work, please consider supporting us on patreon.com/stopthekilling or by simply subscribing on Apple Podcasts now. Not only will you help us to continue this mission, but you'll also get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive content that takes a deeper look into unfolding incidents. And don't forget, Stop the Killing is a team effort. You can make a difference by leaving a review on Apple and sharing this podcast with others. Together, we can keep pushing these conversations forward. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay safe, stay informed, and let's continue to stop the killing.